and know of the person before they got to this big position that they're in. So what kind of childhood did you have?
Well, thank you very much. Important question. The kind of childhood, firstly, I grew up during apartheid, so you can imagine that we lived in a very limited space in terms of what we can access, where we can go. But it was also an exciting time because you were able to go to school, and your childhood was influenced by a number of things. One of them being the political climate in the country, particularly at the time that I was going through primary school. All you knew was apartheid. So you knew that there were certain things that you didn't have access to as a child. But also I grew up in a relatively poor family, and also a large family. I lived in Soweto, Penning Street, and I grew up with at least at any given time with 20 people in a house. But that's not the narrative that drives. It's one of the factors that influences my thinking as I am now, but it's not the defining one, because one of the things I told myself as a child was, I said, I will not, this is not the life that I want. I don't want to struggle like this. I don't want to. So education was very, very important.
And growing up in that kind of environment, still being young with what limited resources that you were exposed to, I'm just wondering, what was your first dream career when you were young?
I know that you'll probably not believe this, but I was in standard 1. That's grade 3 in today's terminology. And I knew then already that I was made to help think people through things. In my classmates, for example, in standard 1, standard 2, grade 3 and grade 4 today, I would always stand up for other kids. But something very profound also happened when I was very young. An aunt of mine was stabbed to death in front of me at home by her boyfriend, in a jealous rage. And I grew up thinking about, at that early age already, about gender-based violence, and I also grew up in an environment that had gangs. The famous Panga Bender was part of our streets. So you can imagine, seeing violence was maybe not an everyday occurrence, but you were exposed to it at an early age already. So I was thinking, what can I do that can help me contribute to making society a better place? And that's when I already knew that I wanted to be a lawyer.
And that's the beauty of just, changing the narrative and such a huge tragedy and allowing it to shape you. I mean, this is just so inspiring. And from that, if I may pivot to something more positive, what was your fondest memories from your primary school or even your high school days in your neighborhood?
I think in primary school, it was the carefreeness. It was, we didn't know about the terminology such as Zula, when we were kids, but we understood what it means to hustle, just before school goes out, to be able to get your vetkoek and your piece of wors and ice. Those were the things we would look forward to, when school is going out. But also, it's the kind of friendships that we had, kids that you walk with. From Camp, where I went to primary school, so walking from there to Soweto, quite a distance, and all the little things that you do on that walk, the kinds of chats that you have. So some of my fondest memories were those friendships that I forged with those kids. But I was telling a friend of mine yesterday, actually, in fact, I was telling my partner that I think my happiest time was during high school. I enjoyed high school because it was a place that shaped my thinking. It was a place, particularly in 1988 and 89, when NANSO as a student movement was making inroads in what we were no longer willing to accept as the student and learner population. And those uprisings in 1988 and 89, so that in a way shaped my political thinking. But also I understood that if I wanted to get out of the kind of poverty in which I grew up, if I wanted to get out of the environment that was no longer it did not provide growth potential for me as an individual, I needed to study. I needed to work hard at school. So I spent a lot of my high school years focusing on a bit of politics and also a lot more on education, because I wanted to get the vrystelling and go to university. And at the time that I thought about law school, there was no law school in Namibia, so we needed to go to South Africa, and you needed an exemption, a matriculation exemption, it was called then, to be able to get into the schools in South Africa. I was very, very excited about the prospect of that.
Indeed. Now, earlier you mentioned zularing and hustling. Did you ever, in your career, have a bit of a side hustle, and what was it?
Actually, I did not have two things. One, when I was in grade 12, I needed money for applications to universities. I needed, envelopes. So I did domestic work. I was working for one gentleman in Auspanplatz, cleaning his house every Saturday, and he was paying me $200 Namibian dollars at the end of the year, which is a lot of money at the time. And I'm talking about 1991, 1992.
Yeah.
So that was something I did. And of course, generally, if I needed something, if I wanted to buy toiletries and my parents couldn't afford it, I would wash classrooms of teachers. I would always offer a service. I never asked anyone for money for a return of service. So that was one of the things. But when I was at the University of Namibia as a lecturer and also as deputy dean, maybe not so much when I was deputy dean because I didn't have a lot of time, I actually registered a training institute, and that supplemented my income at the university. But of course, when I became chairperson of the Law Reform and Development Commission, and now as minister, there is no opportunity for side hustle because you are expected to focus on your portfolio. And you also don't want to, typically side hustles can get you into a potential conflict of interest. And you want to avoid that as a minister.
Oh, but Minister...
So I don't have a side hustle at the moment. I'm only relying purely on the salary as a minister.
Oh, no, of course. 100% of your attention has to be there. We totally understand. But I'm so fascinated by your story and your humble beginnings, and to see where you are right now. I think you need to write a book, ma'am. Like, this is what needs to happen right now is you need to write a book.
Yeah,
but right now,
lots of books that you should be writing. Many similar stories from classmates. Some of them were doing very well, actually. So I think Ashipina at the time produced some good people from there.
Minister, if I can just have you on the line for just a little while longer, I'm just going to go to an ad break, and we will touch base with you in a hot second.
No problem.
All right. And we still have on the line, fascinating story that we're having here from Minister Yvonne Dausab, who's the Namibian Cabinet Minister responsible for the Ministry of Justice. We're just going to go for a very quick break, and we'll be right back. You're very much welcome. I'm the DJ here, and Yvonne is thanking me. So, still having on the line, we have Yvonne Dausab, who is our Namibian Cabinet Minister responsible for the Ministry of Justice. We talked about how she grew up in Soweto in the township, how she was actually working in a house, in a home, and she was the custodian thereof, and just her illustrious career and where she finds herself right now. So, speaking of where she finds herself right now, Minister, I want to know, what are you most proud of achieving in your current portfolio, and what are you still hoping to accomplish before your tenure ends?
A very, very important question, because I've just been there for just over a year. One of the things I'm most proud of is the manner in which we have participating in managing the COVID-19 crisis that we're finding since the crisis started in March of 2020. Some of the work that the ministry is doing, a twofold. One is that we're responsible for producing the regulations we're also responsible for explaining and interacting with members of the public about the meaning of the regulations, how they apply, what they mean if people are not complying, and so forth. So that's very important because, in a crisis also, you get to see, what the capabilities are of your team, what the response style is, but also the time within which you respond to issues. So that's one. The second and equally important, and it really has to do with what the ministry's main objective and strategic outlook is, which is really that we want to do two things. We want to ensure that we provide legal services in its various formations, but also that we make access to justice accessible. And I think everything that we do is to try and respond to those strategic objectives. So the second thing is the fact that we were able to table 4 bills, all of them very important. That's the bill on the amendments to the Magistrates Court, which deals with two things. One is the fact that we're responding to issues around repossession of houses, in part by amending some of the provisions so that there's judicial oversight, but also is the fact that we are increasing the jurisdiction of the Magistrates Court so that people across the country can go to any court and not just to the High Court for problems that exceed a certain amount. That's an important part of those amendments of the magistrates and the High Court legislation. And then, of course, very importantly, we are amending and strengthening the text of the Rape Amendment Bill, in the Rape Amendment Bill, but also the Domestic Violence Act. I think important because we are able to respond to some of the protests that took place last year around shut it all down and so forth. So some of the things are actually a direct response to some of the concerns that have been raised by the Namibian public through that. So that is an important achievement, I thought. The third one, maybe not so direct, is the fact that we provided some form of support to members of the public through what we call our Ministry of Justice outreach program, social responsibility. So we were part of the ministries that provided food and clothing to members of the public, particularly when COVID was hitting us, maybe not in the same way it does now, but then. So that for me is important because we were able to do some tangible things as the ministry and participate in the social responsibility aspect of our society.
Oh, indeed. It's a great accomplishment so far, and you've just only been there for a year. I mean, wow. Finally, we are out of town, unfortunately, but I really want you to help us as the Namibians. How can we engage with your ministry?
Well, we have a website where we load all our laws and regulations and so forth called namibli.org. So members of the public can access us there. We are available on our social media platforms, Facebook, Twitter. I don't know whether my staff members are available on Instagram and so forth. I am not personally, but I am certainly available on WhatsApp, Facebook, and Twitter. But just also, we allow for walk-ins from time to time if we are available. Of course, now it's not possible because of the spike in coronavirus cases. And then, of course, we are also available telephonically. If the phone rings longer than 3 minutes, you must file a complaint with us. That's how available we are. And otherwise, as a Minister of Justice and as a Cabinet Minister, it is an expectation from the Head of State that we are available to members of the public at any given time. So we are available if we are invited to come and speak at events, to come and explain and so forth. That's the level of our availability.
Oh, indeed. Well, very available you are. Minister, thank you so much for taking the time. I call dibs on the book, please, and thank you. As soon as that book is ready, I need that hard copy.
Absolutely.
So thank you for joining us this morning.
Keep reminding me to write it.
Oh, please. I will be on you. 3 minutes, and if it rings, I'm filing a complaint.
All right.
All right, then.
Have a lovely day.
You too. Bye. And we had the pleasure there of having Yvonne Dausab, who is the Namibian Cabinet Minister, who's responsible for the Ministry of Justice, as our Royal Hustler for this morning.
Royal Hustlers was proudly brought to you by